Good afternoon, KCAA listeners. This is the Kathleen Wells Show. I'm your host, Kathleen, and I'm thrilled to have my guest today. You know what? I read an article of his in Counterpunch, and I thought, oh gosh, I wasn't familiar with his work, but it was so on point, so exact, so precise, so what I've been feeling, and I haven't seen it in the mainstream media. I don't even see it that much in the alternative media. His article was in Counterpunch. I just felt I had to get him on the show. And that's one of the things that my show is about. My show is about presenting a point of view that you don't normally hear, you don't normally get in the mainstream media. You don't normally get it even in the alternative media. You rarely hear it. So we're all walking around, thinking the same thoughts, like robots. I mean, it's so not cool. I don't like it. Isn't there more than one way to perceive a particular situation? And the issue also is we've all been perceiving things in terms of race relations, in terms of how the universe operates, how America operates with regards to police brutality, with regards to mass incarceration, with regards to how black folks are treated in America, with regards to how all people of color are treated in the globe. We've been discussing it over and over in the mainstream media, and what has changed? Nothing. Nothing has changed. The problems persist. They've been going on. Hey, listen, what did we do? We even nominated, we even elected a black president. Has mass incarceration changed? Has police brutality gotten better? Has the unemployment rate for blacks gone below 20%? We have a black president. Have things? Hey, what about income? What did President Obama say? I didn't even listen to his speech because I no longer believe in the system. When I first started this radio station about 4 years ago, I literally thought, oh, there's a possibility things could be better. Wasn't I naive? Wasn't I naive? I mean, am I an idiot or what? Yeah, I didn't know I was ignorant. And so this is why I want to do this show. I want to do this show, the Kathleen Wells Show, to bring a different perspective. We don't get a different perspective anywhere. And that's why I have my guest today, Ajamu Baraka. He's going to come. He's speaking to us live from Colombia. That's fantastic. But before I bring him on, I want to tell you a little bit about him. Ajamu Baraka is a human rights defender whose experience spans 3 decades of domestic and international education and activism. He's a veteran grassroots organizer. Listen, a grassroots. So I got to ask him, has he ran into our president, Barack Obama? I'm sure he has. He's a veteran grassroots organizer whose roots are in the Black liberation movement and in anti-apartheid and Central American solidarity struggles. Mr. Baraka has provided human rights training for grassroots activists across the country, briefings on human rights to the U.S. Congress, and has appeared before and provided statements to various United Nations agencies, including the UN Human Rights Commission, which was the precursor to the current UN Human Rights Council. Mr. Baraka was the founding executive director of the Human Rights Network, and the organization was the first domestic human rights formation in the United States, explicitly committed to the application of international human rights standards to the United States. So in other words, Mr. Baraka is the man to talk to when you want to talk about human rights on a domestic level and on the international level. So, Mr. Baraka, thank you and welcome to the Kathleen Wells Show.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Well, I'm so delighted to have you. I know on your website you have a quote by Bell Hooks, which talks about being a voice on the margins, being a voice on the margin. Are you a voice from the margins? And tell us what that has meant exactly.
Well, you know, as Bell Hooks said in her quote, the margins is not a bad place to be because it provides you a perspective. You know, when you want to see a city, you know, the best way of seeing that the whole city is to go to the highest part of the city, to go to the top of the tallest building. Well, you want to see a society in its totality. Sometimes to see that, you need to back away. You need to go and situate yourself at the margins of it, and you will see out and see all of it, and see all of the nonsense, all of the BS, all of what's real and what's not real. So the margin is a good place to be, and that's where you find the best production of knowledge, from the margins.
So you're the man. You've been working in human rights, domestic and international, for the last 3 decades, 30 years or more. How are things going on the human rights front? Good or bad?
Well, I mean, not too well. We know that just in the last 15 years, for example, this century, we've had some terrible situations, beginning with the attack in New York, and then the retaliatory attack in Afghanistan, and the invasion of Afghanistan, and then the invasion of Iraq. We've seen the enhancement of right-wing Islamic fundamentalism, and we've seen it spread across the so-called Middle East, across North Africa, and to other parts of the world. We've seen a series of wars, droughts, torture taking place, and we've seen, people who identify themselves as part of the human rights movement. We've seen a very unfortunate identification of moving toward some of those same powers that are primarily responsible for some of these horrific events that I just described. So the independence of the human rights movement is now in question. So it's not a good situation for human rights. There's too much suffering, too much pain, too many deaths.
So in this 30-year span, things are moving backwards. I mean, what do I want to say?
Yes.
Martin Luther King Jr., since the civil rights movement, things are now reverting back. Would you agree to that?
Things have not gotten better, and they have in many cases gotten worse. When we look at, for example, economic and social rights in the U.S., we see that for working people over the last 4 decades, things have not gotten better. That basically wages have stagnated. The employment rates have vacillated. And we have in the black community astronomical rates of unemployment, especially among our young people. We see that there's been a normalization of war, a commitment on the part of people in the U.S. to support war. We've seen an escalation of racial incidents with the killings of black men across this country, one every 28 hours. So things have gotten worse in many cases. It really have.
Mm-hmm. But yet a lot of Americans will say we've elected a black president. What's your response to that?
Well, and I think you said in your opening remarks, what has been the result of that in terms of changing the reality of people's lives. We also were told that when this black president was elected, that we were in a post-racial period, a post-racial era, where people are going to be seen by the content of their character as opposed to the color of their skin. Well, of course, we haven't seen that to become a reality yet.
In fact, the unemployment rate, I read an article that says the unemployment rate for blacks has never been below 20%. And yet, President Obama delivered his State of the Union speech last night, and he's talking about the middle class. So, hey, what percentage of us are in the middle class? Does it impact us directly, our community? I don't know.
Well, and that's a good point, that when we talk about the so-called middle class, we talk about it in a way in which we don't differentiate the different sectors of the population. then you can present a very confusing picture. When you look at the middle class or you look at working people, and I don't really use that term necessarily, the middle class, because it can be somewhat confusing, because even people who are so-called middle class are primarily workers. But when you look at the middle class or working people, you find that when you break down the numbers and you look at specific communities, then it's a different story. As you said, when you look at black unemployment, for example, it is double that of whites. When you look at the black unemployment and then you factor in for gender and for age, you see that young people are suffering an astronomical rate of unemployment. You see that women are suffering an astronomical rate of unemployment. So when Barack Obama talks about the turnaround of the economy and suggests that the better days are here and more to come in the future, he's not speaking to the realities that I see in my community. The reality of the fact that most of my brothers and sisters, in my immediate family, are right now unemployed or underemployed. The fact that there's so many of our people lost their homes during this economic crisis, and when it was revealed that basically people had been ripped off for their houses, that resulted in a loss in black wealth that was more dramatic, almost as dramatic or maybe more dramatic than what we saw at the end of the Reconstruction period when the Freedmen's Bank collapsed and we lost $55 million. Mm-hmm. So there's been, and the result is that for the black community and even the Latino community, we're talking about different realities. And Barack Obama, as president, has not been in the forefront of constructing any policies that have dealt directly with those other realities of the other people in this country called the U.S. And so, it doesn't really matter to us. It hasn't been any real benefit beyond the symbolic to have this black man in the White House.
Mm-hmm. And then when you see in the liberal, so-called, I put in quotation marks, the liberal media, they're like, oh, Obama, they're like, oh my God, he's so fantastic. He's doing wonderful things. This is the liberal media. Obama gave he gave a fantastic speech. He is helping the middle class. This is the liberal media. I mean, the media on the left or whatever, the progressives or the Democrats or whatever, they just love this guy and they think he's so fantastic. And yet who needs the most progress in America? Black and brown folks. It's just invisible.
But Kathleen, even among the liberals, there's been a lot of dissatisfaction with Barack Obama. Barack Obama came into office with there was a lot of people who had a lot of hope in him. A lot of people recognized that the American people were ready for change. Mm-hmm. But they didn't understand that Barack Obama and the forces behind him had a different agenda. That instead of the kind of insurgent mood that was among the American people, a mood that was ready for some real reform, the Obama candidacy and the Obama presidency was committed to the status quo. They were committed to things as they were. Their primary responsibility was to stabilize the economic system, to make sure that the financial sector, the bankers, were taken care of, and to make sure that there was the conditions created that will allow for the reaccumulation of capital, and it didn't really matter what was really happening with the American people. In fact, they used the economic crisis as an opportunity to continue to drive down wages. That's one reason why you have the astronomical unemployment rate, to drive down wages and to really undermine the bargaining power of labor and to undermine the confidence of working people in order to create a condition in the U.S. in which U.S. labor, the value of U.S. labor would be almost competitive with what we see in various parts of the so-called third world. So this has been a disaster. and many people, even liberals, have recognized that, and many of them have, in fact, turned against Barack Obama.
Mm-hmm. It is a disaster. And who are these people behind his presidency? Who are these people?
Primarily representatives of the financial sector, Goldman Sachs. You look at the people who he brought into his administration. Robin Rubin from Goldman Sachs, Lawrence Summers, who was the architect of gutting the Glass-Steagall Act under Bill Clinton back in the 1990s, that allowed for to drop that firewall between normal banking practices and investment banking. When you drop that wall, that you had financial institutions, you had banks playing some very dangerous games with the money that was in their institutions, and that's when you had all these creative ways of creating money, where they started speculating on debt and passing paper among themselves, that led to the bursting of the bubble that led to the economic crisis in 2008. 2009. So these were the people, the very same people who created the crisis. These were the same people who backed Barack Obama and who he brought their representatives into the administration. Those were the people who raised almost $500 million for him. His campaign cost around $800 million. More than half of that came from the 1%, and in particular from the financial sector.
So what kind
That's
of
who backs him.
That's who backs him, and what kind of accountability must we give Barack Obama? He's a smart man, so he knew what he was doing, right?
Of course.
Uh-huh.
But Barack Obama is not an evil man either. Barack Obama is a politician. He is a careerist who believes in the way this system is organized. He believes basically in trickle-down economics. There's a reason why he says, of course, there's a reason why he says that his favorite president was Ronald Reagan.
Well, listen, he was a grassroots activist, and he's a smart man, so how could he believe? Because they believe. When you read the information, you see the evidence. There is no trickling down. So, and he's smart. So how can he believe? Do you know?
Well, I hear your question. I think that he believes that a combination of the market and the activity of capitalists in the market, creating jobs, and the activity and support a role of the government eventually leads to prosperity. And they will look at and hold up as examples, for example, the 1990s under Bill Clinton, because we perceive the 1990s to be a period of relative prosperity for the American people. But again, this is the issue. It's the issue of perspective, of worldview. Even under Bill Clinton, when you look at the specifics, you look at the realities of Black people and Latino people and many, many working class people, it wasn't the good times they tried to pretend it was in the 1990s. Mm-hmm. So that kind of world view, that kind of value system that sees progress and sees good times being reflected in a doubling of the stock market, the creation of more millionaires, that kind of perspective is the kind of perspective that Barack Obama shares. So he's not evil. He just sees the world in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And yet he was a grassroots activist. See, this is what's perplexing to me. He was at the, he was there at the grassroots, right? And so you see that stuff isn't trickling down.
Well, again, he was doing work in the community. He was doing primarily voter education, voter registration stuff. But again, Barack Obama shared a belief that if you create the conditions for people to take advantage of certain so-called opportunities, then you have economic development. He believes that. Now, some of us argue that the system is not structured for everybody to quote unquote make it. That is structured for some people to be trapped into certain kinds of dead-end jobs, and that the only way we can address the needs of those workers is we have to adjust the system. We have to change the system. Well, he doesn't believe that. And you can, if you have that kind of ideological outlook, then you could look at the same reality that I look at, but you see things in a different way.
We're speaking with Ajamu Baraka, and you know what? We're going to take a break right now. When we come back from the break, we're going to talk about your article in Counterpunch titled "The Charlie Hebdo White Power Rally in Paris, a celebration of Western hypocrisy." We're going to talk about that article. This is Ajamu Baraka, who's a human rights defender. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Yes, it is Ajamu Baraka. He's a human rights defender. He's joining us live from Colombia, South America. Isn't that interesting? What is it like here in Colombia? Well, tell me about Colombia. I hear about all these drug cartels. Is it like that?
Well, of course, you have that kind of stuff here in Colombia, but Colombia is a beautiful country, a very interesting place. It has the third highest population of black people outside of Africa. Brazil being number one, the U.S. being number two, and Colombia being number three. Very interesting culture, because you have parts of Colombia where black people establish their communities and retain a culture that is, you go to parts of Colombia and basically it's like being back in Africa. So it's a very interesting place, very diverse. The weather is fantastic. It's like, it's summer year-round, except for right now it's raining season, so it's a little cool. And cool here meaning in the evenings it'll drop down to about 72. So no, I love it. The culture is dynamic, and is still relatively close to the U.S., so I can pop in and out when I need to.
So, as I said initially at the beginning, that I was motivated to call you, to contact you, and have you be a guest because of the article that you wrote for Counterpunch titled "Charlie Hebdo White Power Rally." You say in Paris. You say it's a celebration of Western hypocrisy. That rally. Explain.
Basically, what happened with the rally, what happened with the response to the very deadly and horrific shooting at Charlie Hebdo was an exercise in Eurocentric vanity. That is, while it's tragic that those lives were lost, one has to wonder, how is it that incident garners 24/7 media coverage, garners a massive rally and march with over 40 leaders coming to Paris. And the answer to why that happened is because that incident was framed not just as a terrorist incident, but it was framed as an attack on Western civilization. It was framed as an attack on Western values. It was framed as an attack specifically against the freedom of speech. And so there was this outpouring of support that says that we're going to support freedom of speech because it's been under attack by these racialized others who don't respect and recognize that superior value. Now, hypocritical, because of course this notion of freedom of speech or absolute freedom of speech doesn't exist. It doesn't exist in France. It doesn't exist almost any place. But they created this perception, this imagined freedom of speech issue. And basically what they then did was to use this incident and this rally and this march as sort of a celebration of superiority of Western culture and Western civilization, and demonized indirectly every other culture that may not recognize the value of satire They may suggest that even if you are from another religion, you don't disrespect a religion. That says that there should be some limits on so-called freedom of speech. So it became this reframing in such a way where it played right into the vanity of Westerners as the representatives of the most advanced civilization on the planet. Something we know is a lie, but yet it was something that's very convenient to generate almost like a white solidarity movement that we saw with that rally in Paris.
Mm-hmm. And you just pointed out something that I hadn't thought about. You say some cultures may not even recognize satire. Some cultures may not even recognize the fact that you joke about religion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So,
and that's where Eurocentrism comes in. That basically the inability to see, to attempt to see the world in a way other than where you are not at the center. To consider that there are other ways of seeing the world. To consider that there are different kind of values of equal value to your values. Yeah, there are very many parts of the world where this notion of satire is something that doesn't compute. Okay, and it definitely doesn't compute when it comes to what people may see as disrespecting someone's religion. But see, again, it's all built on lies, because if there was absolute freedom of speech in France, then you wouldn't have the French government putting limits on people protesting against the Israeli invasion of Gaza. The French government banned protests. The French government has laws, they have hate laws on their books that make it a crime to engage in certain kinds of speech that incites hatred. And that those laws are used quite extensively when it comes to any perceived attacks against Judaism or against Jews. But yet there's open season when it comes to Arabs and Muslims. So it's a contradiction in the whole framing of this Jesuit Charlie. As I said in my piece, this was nothing but a sort of a rallying cry for white solidarity and white supremacy.
And in fact, you write, the contradictory nature of the European self-understanding, how that self-perception is utterly disconnected from its practice. And then you talk about like 500 years of colonialism, so on and so forth.
Exactly. The whole idea that European culture, French culture specifically, represents some type of commitment to human rights, to humanism, to their understanding of Western liberalism, is contradictory. But see, there's a reason why it's contradictory, and there's a reason why they don't see it. You see, at the center of European philosophy, European thought, coming out of the humanist tradition in the 18th century, they divided humanity between those people who were recognized as fully human, who had rights that needed to be respected, and everybody else. Those people who were fully human were, guess who? Primarily white people, and white males in particular. Everybody else, your humanity was suspect. In fact, you were relegated to the area of non-being. Therefore, you were eligible to be treated any kind of way, to have your lands taken, to be colonized, to be enslaved, to be tortured. And that's exactly what the French did in various parts of the world. And that's what most of the Western colonizing countries involve themselves in. But they don't see those crimes as, in fact, crimes. For them, the only criminal activity that takes place is when crimes take place in their societies. So when they are attacked, when white life is lost, that's when it's a tragedy. Where you can go to Iraq and you can impose economic sanctions and 500,000 children can die, And Madeleine Albright would say, it's the price we had to pay. It was worth the cost.
Collateral.
You can attack collateral damage. You attack a country and you kill a million Iraqis, and to free them. And hey, that's just the way it is,
But I mean, it's the price we pay for what? For what? What is the price for what?
For their conception of what is a free society and what humanity should be all about. In other words, if your societies don't look like theirs, then basically you are eligible for this kind of treatment. And if you have people who want to be like them, then those are the ones they are willing to help. And even if it means killing off thousands of their citizens in their own country, like what they're doing in Syria, then it's worth the price. It's worth it for everybody to be the same, meaning everybody to be like them.
Mm-hmm. And you say that a fundamental component of white supremacy is the valuation of white life over everyone else. White life is more important. That's basically what you've just summed up. So one of the things that I wanted, what was I going to say? Oh, the idea, what I thought is the idea that we've been bombing for the last decade the Middle East, killing children, killing mothers, sending drones, invading Palestine, stealing their land, bombing Gaza, and we're not going to expect any kind of bad feeling. It's so arrogant to think that the Middle Eastern countries, Muslims, Arabs, would not be pissed at Western civilization, if you want to call it civilization. It's so arrogant to me that white people don't think that Arabs would be angry with the Western world.
Well, they will say that even if they were angry, it doesn't justify the attack at Charlie Hebdo, and we could partially agree with that. But see, what you just described is the kind of way in which the Islamic fundamentalists look at things that result in more and more of these young individuals from places like France, and other parts of Western Europe, and other parts of the Middle East, joining their ranks because they see just what you described. They see the bombings in the Middle East. They've seen the pictures of torture at Abu Ghraib. They understand what's going on right now in Guantanamo. They read about the torture report that came out in the U.S. They see and they have seen what happened in Afghanistan, what's happening in Iraq. And so the recruitment for Islamic fundamentalists has been done basically by the activity, the behavior of these Western countries.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm just playing the devil's advocate, and I can hear people who are from France, from America say, whites from France, whites from America say, if your country, your value system is so fantastic and civilized and perfect and beautiful, why do you even migrate to France? What's your response to that?
That people migrated to France when the conditions in their own countries, as a result of the colonial relationship between their countries and France, became intolerable, and therefore they decided that in order for them to survive, for them to make it, then they would immigrate to the center of their empire. In this case, going to the center of the French Empire, which means going to France. So the unequalness in terms of so-called developed countries and the global south, or the so-called third world, that unequalness is not the result of some type of inherent genetic or biological ability of the people in these two different places. That unequalness is the consequence of a relationship that what we see in the West, in the North, the development we see in the West is a direct consequence of the exploitation, the ripping off of people and resources in the global South. So for those people to move themselves into France or into Germany or into the U.S. is a natural consequence of that kind of relationship. And the only way that's reversed is when people have the ability to be self-determinate, to develop along their natural lines, to have a relationship in which they're not being dominated by outside forces, when they are allowed to be creative and to develop for themselves. As long as you don't have that, then you're going to have people migrating from these zones of exploitation to the center.
We're speaking with Ajamu Baraka. His recent article, he's a human rights defender, domestic and international human rights defender. His recent article is Charlie Hebdo White Power Rally in Paris, a celebration of Western hypocrisy. You can find it on Counterpunch and also at his website, ajamubaraka.com. We're going to take a break and we'll come right back with my guest, Mr. Baraka. Welcome back to the Kathleen Wells Show. I'm your host, Kathleen, and I'm speaking with domestic and international human rights defender Ajamu Baraka. And let me ask you about something you mentioned in your article, the fact that, 2,000 Nigerians were slaughtered by Boko Haram, and yet no march. Why not?
Well, that's part of the contradiction, that the same weekend that the march was organized in Paris, and one aspect of that march was supposed to be a march against terrorism. That same weekend, the report started to emerge that there was this slaughter in Nigeria where maybe 2,000 people were murdered by another Islamic fundamentalist group. But yet at that march, there was no words of solidarity, of comfort, no outrage. It was as if those people didn't even exist. And that, to me, was another piece of evidence that suggested that this wasn't really about anti-terrorism. It wasn't about the sanctity of human life. It was about the sanctity of European life. So, that's a contradiction. So, but we should talk about Boko Haram for a second, because there's a very interesting situation. We all remember the Bring Back Our Girls campaign. And we need to talk about that because, as I talked about in one of my articles on Boko Haram, you can't understand the enhanced military capacity of Boko Haram without connecting that to U.S. machinations, including with the French and the English, or the British, in Libya. That it was a direct consequence of overthrowing Muammar Gaddafi's government in Libya, that you had the enhancement of these Islamic groups across North Africa, including Boko Haram, who received training and received weapons from Libya once those weapons fell in the hands of these Islamic extremists in Libya. So what we have now in northern Nigeria, northeastern Nigeria, is a real crisis with Boko Haram involved in open fight with the Nigerian government that's now spilled over into 3 other countries.
So we're talking about complete failure. It's a mess. We don't provide context. We don't provide any political links as to why something is happening, why there's blowback. It's just like chaos. It's like we're living in a globe of just anarchy. It's not anarchy in the traditional sense, but it's just an utter mess, and everything is connected yet disconnected. People are not, they're providing superficial analysis, if you want to call it any analysis. It's just a mess. How do we fix this?
Well, I think that what you hit the nail on the head, that part of the problem we have is that there's no context. And so it does seem and feel sort of overwhelming and incoherent. But there is a context. And the context is the desperate attempts on the part of Western powers, including the U.S., as a leader of Western powers, to maintain their hegemony. And they are prepared to use whatever tactic necessary to do that. If it means utilizing Muslim extremists in Syria to overthrow the government of Assad, then they'll do that. If that results in blowback, like what we saw in France, or what we are going to probably see in other parts of Europe, well, then so be it. So the American people and the people of Europe, the first thing they have to do is to cut through the propaganda of their own governments. They've got to see things for what they really are. They have to understand that their governments are talking out of one side of their mouth about being opposed to Islamic terrorism, but on the other side of the mouth, they are involved in providing material support, training, logistical support, weapons to those same Islamic fundamentalists. So they've got to understand what is happening, understand the game that's being played on them, because in the end, the ones who benefit from the chaos are in fact those same powers. They benefit because, with the chaos in Nigeria, you have the U.S. government that wanted to be more deeply entrenched in Nigeria, getting an entry point. The whole Bring Back Our Girls campaign put so much pressure on the Nigerian government that they can no longer resist the efforts by the U.S. to get more involved with their military. Because the U.S. government is their main concern with Nigeria is the growing influence of who? The Chinese. So they want to be more deeply involved. So they use the crisis of Boko Haram. Some people argue that they helped to manipulate that. But they use the crisis of Boko Haram to now get more involved in Nigerian politics, training the Nigerian military. And remember now, we're talking about a military that has taken power on a number of occasions in Nigeria. One of the issues in Nigeria right now is, and one of the concerns that they have with Boko Haram, that's why they tried to play down the threat of it, was they are very nervous about the Nigerian military becoming more militarily enhanced, and then having the temptation at some point of doing away with the democratic process in Nigeria and taking power again. And that likelihood is increased when you have more closer connections between the Nigerian government and the U.S. military.
And you're saying this is all to maintain Western U.S. hegemony in the globe. And, we're going to take a short break. We're going to take a really short break. But when we come back, we've gone full circle because, Barack Obama is the sort of figurehead of Western hegemony. So that gets back to his character. Let's take a real quick break. And when we come back, I want to talk about Barack Obama's character. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Welcome. My guest today is Ajamu Baraka, who's joining us live from Colombia, South America. And we've come full circle, Ajamu, don't you think? Because we started out talking about Barack Obama, and you said all these machinations are taking place on the planet because of the need, the necessity for the U.S. to maintain hegemony on the globe. And yet, who is the figurehead for Western hegemony but Barack Obama? So doesn't that raise an issue about his character?
Well,
who would want to be over something like that?
Well, but it's what we kind of touched on earlier. Barack Obama believes in, for example, the exceptionality of the U.S. He believes in so-called American exceptionalism. He believes that what we have in the world today is a result of sort of a natural order. If that means that European societies are dominant, well, that's just the way things are. He believes that these societies represent the apex of human development. He really believes that, I think. So, and he believes that the U.S. is a special place with special responsibilities. So for Barack Obama and for his administration and for most of the political elite and the economic elite, for them, the maintenance of U.S. Dominance, U.S. hegemony is just a natural expression of how things are. It provides order to the world, they believe, and they think ultimately it's a good thing for the planet. They believe that.
That I just can't, when all these lives lost, I just can't reconcile that in my mind. Like, even if those things that you say are true, I'm not willing to kill babies and mothers and maim old women and old men and destroy families to maintain that. Do you know what I mean? How can
Exactly.
I mean, even if you believe all that stuff about the exceptionalism of America, are you willing to kill people to maintain it?